I'm going to talk today about miracles. It's always a fun subject. What is a miracle? What's going on? What do we call a miracle? When do we call something a miracle?
We don't understand the
When we expect something to happen. No, when we don't expect something to happen, it does.
When we don't expect something, when we don't understand how it's happening,
The impossible becomes possible.
what we think is impossible happens. Kind of blows our mind. What?
Extraordinary.
Extraordinary, absolutely. Yes. Everyone here is a miracle. You, I'm looking every one of you in the eye, are a miracle. What is our reference point when we talk about miracles? When we say something, oh, that's impossible, what are we referring to?
thought it never happened?
Hmm?
Thought it would never happen?
We thought it would never happen, right, because we've never seen it. Okay, that's a good reason. Laurie, did you have your hand up?
No.
Okay. Okay. So, these past 3 or 4 weeks, for me, have been miraculous. Most of you probably know, some of you may not. I will share. And the first thing that happened is that I got to spend a week in Orlando, Monday through Friday, immersed in an incredible experience. It was a bunch of kind of the people at the forefront of revitalizing unity as a movement, there in one place, teaching about what's going on with unity right now. Not only politically, financially, yada, 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 but in terms of awareness and in terms of energizing. So I was immersed in this week. It was very exciting. There is a lot to share. I'm not going to try to do it all this morning. Or we'd probably be here for a month. But over time, I will. What happened, I was kind of floating along in this ecstasy at the end of the week. And it was the last night of classes, and I tried to call my wife and couldn't get a hold of her. And called, and called, and called. And, there are times when she's out of touch, and I've learned, don't worry, she'll resurface. It's if she forgot her phone, she lost it, it got dumped in the toilet. You never know. And finally, it was about 10 o'clock. We also have a home phone. And I had called that several times, couldn't reach her. I thought, okay, she must be home by now. I'm just going to call that phone and call it and call it. And if she's asleep, she'll probably eventually wake up and answer the phone. And I called it and I called it and I called it. And after about the 40th ring, the phone picks up and a voice says, hello, this is Molly speaking. My wife is not named Molly. Molly's a friend of ours. And my response was, oh, so gracious. Oh my God, what's going on? I'm sure it made Molly feel really good. And she said, well, I learned that Nancy was in the emergency room. She'd been in a car wreck, and she thought her ankle was hurt, and so she was waiting to have it scanned, just to see if it was broken and if it needed help. And I don't know why, apparently she couldn't call me, and she asked the doctor to, and the doctor called me and asked me to please go feed the dogs. Well, that's good. I mean, I talked to her later. She didn't think anything was serious. She didn't want to worry me. I was in Orlando. You've done that. Oh, I don't need to worry so-and-so, and I'll be okay. And the last time I had talked to her, she was planning to come pick me up at the airport, so I was expecting that. And Molly said, it was kind of weird. Why didn't she call me herself? And then she said, the doctor called me from this number. And so I wrote down the number, and when I hung up, I called it and got a doctor who said, oh yes, we just took Miss Chu off into emergency surgery. Her abdomen was filling with blood. Oh, this was a lot more serious than anybody had thought. And, so I prayed, and I tried to stay centered, and I was feeling it in my gut, like, oh, it's okay, you don't have to do that. And I tried to sleep, and I slept a couple of times, and about 3:45, I woke up again. I thought, she must be back from surgery by now, so I called the number again. Got another doctor who was really pissed off at me for bothering him. And I explained the situation, and he said, okay, wait a minute. So he put me in touch with a nurse in the ICU who said, you got the time frame here? This is like 10 p.m. to 3:45. Oh yes, Miss Chu just arrived in the room. Wow. That is a long time in surgery. Her vital signs are stable, what you hear, and I couldn't get any earlier flight than what I had. I was already flying back in the morning. So I was still trying to stay calm, It's like, oh my God. Got to Durham, got to RDU at 10:30 in the morning, hitched a ride home, dropped my bag at the house, took right off again for ICU. I got there around 11:30, 11:45. It was before noon. And Nancy was kind of awake. She had had the first surgery, which had lasted 6 hours. And they were planning more. They had left her belly open because they had cauterized. They had spent 6 hours cauterizing veins and arteries that were bleeding. And they knew she was still bleeding, and they couldn't figure out where. So they left her open. I didn't know they could do this for a second day of surgery. And the same surgeon came back on duty at, I don't know, whenever they changed shifts that evening, next evening, and they took her back to surgery. And they said, we hope that she's not still bleeding. And if that's the case, we can just sew her up. She came back from that surgery at midnight. 6 more hours. And this time she was really out of it and in screaming pain. And they had to do a partial colectomy. They had to take out a part of her colon, which had been separated from its blood supply. So this was major. And anytime that she came close to consciousness, she was very alert and very lucid. So that was a blessing because we knew her brain was still okay, which that would have made a big difference. And I was very aware that somewhere along the line here, I may have to make a healthcare power of attorney decision. God help me. But the fact that her brain seemed to be intact was important to know. And so every time she woke up, she was screaming, and so they just put her right back under again. And so I stayed with her. This was my 3rd day in the hospital, in the ICU. And in the middle of that next night, around 2:45, her urine production stopped. And the nurses kept coming in and hanging bags for transfusion. I'm like, oh, this does not look good. And the surgeon came in. And the first time I had met him after the second surgery, he'd been kind of like a Cheshire cat. You know, he said, you know, almost nobody survives that accident or that surgery. And this is what it looks like when everything has gone right. And I'm looking at Nancy unconscious in the bed and going, But he was very pleased. So when he came back the third night, and they were hanging pints of blood as fast as they could, I said, am I right to think she might be bleeding internally? And he turned to me and he went, you have to think that. Okay. He was very upset. And everybody left again. And I'm thinking, another surgery? I don't think so. There was no energy in it. There was just no energy there. It was only dead. And I thought, okay, she cannot be bleeding inside at 6 o'clock when they come and take the next bloods. And so I started thinking about everything I'd learned the previous week. I wanted a miracle. Right? So the first thing that comes to mind is, who do you think you are to get a miracle? What if it's not God's plan? You know, what if you claim a miracle and it doesn't happen? What do I think then? So, you know, it was hard to focus on a third day without sleep. But I was really focusing on what I learned, what I had learned during that week in Orlando had been mind-blowing. I mean, you know, I know that God is some kind of an infinite power. I talk to God. I think most people who have had a strong Christian background do that. I still have in me the idea that, well, somehow I have to deserve what I'm asking for. And sometimes God has another idea and I don't get what I ask for. And that's God's plan. Any of these ideas sound familiar? And they were coming up. That's not what I learned in Orlando. What I learned in Orlando was God is not a person. There's no entity. There's no being. God is three things, a trinity. Mind, idea, expression. That's the Trinity. There is an absolute realm, which is everything, every place, always has been, always will be, doesn't change. And there's a relative realm, which is what we think we're experiencing in matter, in changeability. I don't know about you, but I'm not the same person one day to the next. I've learned, I've bumped my toe, whatever. Constant change. That's our life experience here below. And that's everybody's life experience here below. And there's this incredible diversity of people thinking things and doing things and judging things and interpreting things and perceiving things and having feelings based on those perceptions. We have feelings. They're very powerful. They are a state of mind. They don't have an objective existence. They are what our mind does with what we perceive and judge. And then we get feelings. And once we get feelings, we need to honor them, we need to soothe them, we need to express them, we need to let them go. Now, we are beginning to look at a second book by the Dalai Lama. At least we said we were, and I did, called The Book of Joy. And we're going to focus on one piece of the Book of Joy, which is 8 obstacles to joy, each one with a corresponding practice that gets rid of the obstacle. So the first obstacle is anxiety. Boy, was this relevant. And the antidote that the Dalai Lama teaches is mental immunity. Yeah, what? Right. Which comes from doing 2 things. This is Buddhist practice. It really works. The first thing is understanding how our mind works to produce feelings. And that the feelings we have are because we perceived and judged. Okay? The second thing is stop trying to control the uncontrollable. Duh. When we try to control the uncontrollable, we have feelings. And understand that they are temporary. They come from our mind. We can detach from them and let them go. But why don't we stop trying to control the uncontrollable in the first place? We don't actually have to experience those things. And on top of that, the unity teachings add the insight of the absolute realm and the understanding that the way to stop trying to control the relative, changing, experiential things that happen to us, the collisions that keep happening, is to keep our awareness in the absolute realm. We do this every Sunday when we have the silence. That's what we're doing. We're shifting our awareness into the absolute realm. So the people that teach, okay, when something happens to you, stop. Breathe. Really good strategy. And the purpose of it is shift awareness out of the grimble of every day, into the absolute, the unchanging, infinite absolute. Mind, idea, expression. So let's look at that a little bit. Mind, that's what I was trying to do that night before I started to pray. It's like, okay, I want a miracle. I got to figure out, I got to know, I got to remember. How do you do this? Okay? Mind. I don't know how to define mind. It's every idea that could possibly ever exist. Ever. Every. All there already. Every possible idea, including an idea of perfection. So there's an infinite number of ideas in the absolute realm. And the third piece of it is expression. Who expresses?
God.
Both are right. They're both right. That's our divine mission. We express. Which means we think. We don't have to do nothing physical happens in the absolute realm. We think. We choose possible ideas. And when we choose them, when we accept them, when we are thinking them, they exist. They have been energized and expressed. So how do we get from there down to here? We have no control. We're a part of that divine mind idea expression. We're not actually here. We have no control in this relative realm. We do in the absolute. We choose an idea and we express it. And I'm going to use an analogy that occurred to me as Mary Phyllis was playing that beautiful meditation. Where did that music come from? It's an expression of the absolute. And people express it. And each person expresses his or her own idea, own version, own way of being that idea. Excuse me. I do, and it's right over here. Right there on the chair. Thank you. So what we're talking about when we say express is we choose it. What makes us choose one idea over another? It has to do with us, what's going on with us right now, in the moment, what we desire. So I'm like, okay, I get to choose an idea in the absolute. And I need an idea from the absolute. I need the idea of wholeness expressing through Nancy. And I actually need it by something that doesn't exist in the absolute by 6 a.m. when the techs come and they take the blood. Because her hematocrit, her level of red blood cells, is going to determine what happens in the relative. And that's my job. And there isn't anybody to say I don't deserve it. And there isn't any plan that I could be going against. That's my job, is to choose an idea in the absolute and express it. And so I centered and I concentrated on that idea. And I envisioned Nancy whole in the absolute. And I envisioned, and I envisioned, and I envisioned, and I obsessed and kept envisioning until I was exhausted. And then I thought, wait a minute, I don't need to do that. I chose the idea. It's done. It doesn't matter how much I worry. That's in the relative. Okay. So I really had a sense at that point, it's done. And I was able to say, okay, it's done. And let it go. I even got a couple hours sleep, amazingly. At 6 a.m. they came in and took bloods. And I really wasn't worried. Now, there were a couple of other things that had happened. One I knew about, one I didn't know about. One was right after I said, oh, okay, that's done. something led me to lean over and to say into Nancy's ear, "Sweetie, are you planning to stay in this physical life with me?" I mean, she had a right to leave. That was an excellent opportunity to leave, it looked like. I didn't want to, if she was deciding, oh, yeah, it's time to let go, I didn't want to be at cross purposes. I don't know that it would have made a difference. My sophistication in this awareness isn't great enough yet to have answered that question. But, and she was out, and nothing happened. And then 3 minutes later, she stiffened and her eyes popped wide open and she said, "Yes!" She was still unconscious.
Wow.
Yeah. I thought, okay, she's got it. She's accepted this idea too. And I later learned that at about the same time, someone who's pretty close to us had awakened with the thought that something needs to close up in Nancy, and did a distance healing, energy healing at that moment, focusing on that. So, they brought my breakfast. Not Nancy, she wasn't eating. And finally I thought, so what about the hematocrit? And so I caught a nurse, and it was the next shift. So this nurse had no clue what had gone on during the night. And said, so how was Nancy's hematocrit when they took it at 6? And she looked at me like, huh? And then she went and looked it up for me, and she turned around, she said, it was totally normal. Oh my God. I claimed the idea. We have felt the prayers, the energy of people claiming the idea of wholeness for us during the time since February 24th, 25th, 26th, these 3 days. That energy has been so powerful. It's been palpable. We have known, both of us, that a lot of people were holding that idea, and it is manifesting in the relative, in Nancy's body, mind, and spirit. She, from that morning when the hematocrit was normal, she just progressed by leaps and bounds after that. And all the doctors and nurses were coming in and going, wow, repeatedly. So she was discharged to rehab on Tuesday. She is now at a nursing home in rehab. And it's very interesting how many pieces need to be kind of reassembled in somebody's awareness after an event like that. She is spiritually so light and free. I finally said, did you have a near-death experience? Because that's what happens when you do. And she did. And in fact, that's when I learned that my question came right at the moment when she was deliberating. Feels really nice to be in that energy of the absolute. And she said the question reminded her, oh, yeah, I want to stay. I've got something I want to stay for. So to me, it's been a really interesting example of mind, idea, expression, and the power of expression. And by divine law, what exists in the absolute somehow manifests, not in a way that we can control or predict, but it does in the relative. And so we have been on an amazing journey of understanding and experiencing what the head learning that I experienced in Orlando. I've been telling people, okay, so I took the intensive course and then I found myself in the middle of the doctoral exam. That whole concept of mind, idea, spirit, and what we are in that perspective is something I want to revisit a lot. Not necessarily in Sunday talks. I mean, it will be there because I've changed as a result of this whole experience. My awareness is in a different place. But in a class, I would like to do a class on powerful metaphysics after Easter. Keep it in mind. Think about when you could possibly take it so we get as many people as possible enjoying this exploration, this re-languaging, re-committing, revitalizing of the original unity teachings. That, it's been like a game of telephone for 100 years. You know what those do? One person says to somebody else and says to somebody else and says to somebody else and says to somebody else. And nobody's really looked and reinterpreted, again, the whole picture. And with modern technology, they're now able to do that. And it's clarifying dramatically. So I am looking forward to exploring and experiencing this energizing awareness with all of you over the next weeks and months. Thank you.